When my husband, Jack, found out that I couldn't inherit my father's estate, he shouted at me, "What? You can't inherit the property? I don't need you anymore. Let's get a divorce right now." After that, I got my revenge on Jack and my sister, Aurora, who remarried quickly. My name is Victoria. I'm a 32-year-old office worker. Jack and I have been married for 2 years. We met through a relative's introduction and got married. My family was somewhat wealthy, but we only had daughters, me and Aurora. Concerned about a successor, a relative introduced Jack, saying he'd be fine even as a son-in-law. Jack didn't become an adopted son, but he started living with us at my family's home. I lost my mother a few years ago, so it's been my father, Jack, and I living there. Jack seemed very kind and was nice to my father, but something the relative who introduced him said before the wedding stuck with me. I know it sounds strange to say this after introducing Jack myself, but be careful with that guy, he has a thing for money. Despite this warning, Jack didn't seem money obsessed, so I went ahead with the marriage. Even after marrying, I kept an eye on Jack, but he didn't seem overly interested in money. However, he did seem curious about my father's wealth, casually asking about it during drinks. Since Dad didn't hide anything, I didn't worry much. Jack also seemed interested in Aurora, my sister. She's 5 years younger than me, bright and lively, quite the contrast to my calm demeanor. She's also more glamorous. Jack was surprised the first time he saw Aurora, as she looked nothing like me. "Your sister is quite different from you, isn't she?" Seeing my husband captivated by my sister, who was so different from plain me, left me with mixed feelings. Still, it seemed the relative who introduced me to Jack was worried I wouldn't marry and that there'd be no one to continue the family line. I thought there was no need to worry about such things back then because of my beautiful sister, but later I understood why the relatives were concerned. Dad spoiled Aurora. After high school, he sent her to college, then to vocational school. She had not for any particular goal, but because she didn't want to work. Mom was stricter, wanting her to get a job post-college, but Dad overruled and sent her to vocational school. Aurora initially got a job at a company of Dad's acquaintance but left after about 6 months. I was surprised by Aurora's excuses when she quit her job. "I can't show off my talents at that company." Mom and I were dumbfounded by how Aurora talked as if she had mastered her job in just half a year. But Dad believed Aurora's story and quickly arranged another job for her. Not long after joining the company, Mom's health deteriorated and she ended up in the hospital. Once Mom was hospitalized, Aurora visited the hospital daily and kept taking days off from work. She quit this job too, stating she would take care of our mother. Although she claimed to be nursing Mom, she just sat in the room talking or looking at her smartphone in the waiting area. I had to go and get my mother's laundry and change it with new ones while she was in the hospital, and Aurora was useless. Although it might have been nice for Mom to have someone to talk to, her condition worsened so much after a month in the hospital that she couldn't even speak. Mom passed away about a few weeks after her condition worsened. With Dad and Aurora being so unsettled, I had to handle the funeral preparations. The relatives helped in many ways, so we were able to send off our mother properly. After Mom's death, Aurora moved out to live alone and working part-time. She couldn't afford rent on her own, so Dad helped with rent and utilities while she spent her earnings on leisure. When the part-time job money alone was not enough, she would come to Dad and get an allowance. Back when Mom was around, she was strict with Aurora, so Dad didn't give her money, but now he's quite generous with her. I didn't mind much, thinking as long as Dad and Aurora were happy, there was no issue. Even after I got married and started living with my husband, Jack, at my family's home, Dad continued to give Aurora an allowance. I didn't realize it then, but Aurora was also asking Jack for money, and he gladly gave it to her. It seemed he couldn't refuse when asked by my beautiful sister, saying, "Keep this allowance a secret from Victoria. She might get jealous if she finds out." Aurora would go to work whenever she felt like it, living off the money she got from Dad and my husband, but this lifestyle of hers couldn't last forever. This all started when my father fell ill and had to be hospitalized. I managed to visit Dad in the hospital despite my busy work schedule, but Aurora didn't show up. Instead, she started calling me, demanding money. "Dad has been giving me money every month, so you should continue to give me money from now on, too." My rent and utility bills are all deducted from Dad's account. I was shocked when I heard these facts for the first time, spoken to me in an angry tone. It frustrated me that Aurora was more concerned about her finances than our sick father. I wanted to hang up on her, but seeing that she was in trouble, I asked her about the money Dad used to give her. "How much did Dad give you every month? You should get a job and live off your own earnings," she replied grumpily. "Stop nagging. He gave me $1,000 a month, and that's not including rent." I was appalled at how proudly she stated the amount. Giving such a large sum monthly would certainly not encourage her to work seriously. I had thought Dad would recover soon, so I didn't think much of continuing to give Aurora money. However, Dad's condition suddenly worsened, and I quickly contacted our relatives. The doctor informed us that Dad was in a critical condition, which shocked me deeply. I wished for Jack's support during this time, but he was busy with work and rarely visited the hospital. When he did, he insensitively asked about Dad's inheritance, like, "Your dad's estate must be huge, right? Since you and your sister are the only heirs, you'll split it evenly." I was speechless at his fixation on the inheritance, realizing what the relatives meant when they warned about his interest in money. When I told Aurora about Dad's critical state over the phone, she was only concerned about her allowance. "Not that it matters, but you have to make sure you keep giving me my money every month. I can't live without that money." Her call ended abruptly. I was infuriated, but also disturbed to faintly hear a man's voice in the background, which sounded familiar and gave me a bad feeling. A month later, Dad passed away, and neither Aurora nor Jack were there in his last moments. Having experienced Mom's funeral, I knew how daunting funeral preparations were. To make matters worse, neither Jack or Aurora helped, and Aurora didn't even attend the funeral. Jack showed up but left immediately after, claiming he had work. A relative who had introduced me to Jack noticed his absence and asked, "What happened to your husband? Isn't it strange that the mourner's husband isn't here?" I could only respond with a wry smile. "He said he's busy with work and had to leave." Relatives listened to my story and sighed, and I felt like sighing too. After my father's funeral was finally over, and I could breathe a sigh of relief, my husband asked me with a smirk, "Finally, how much did you inherit? Even if you split it with your sister, it must be a considerable amount, right?" His mind was clearly filled with thoughts of Dad's estate, just as the relative had warned before our marriage. Disappointed to see his true nature, I replied nonchalantly, "Aurora gets $10 million, and I get nothing." I hadn't even started discussions with the lawyer, and the funeral had just ended. I was far from sorting out my feelings. Seeing Jack happily talk about the inheritance, I felt like laughing in anger. Believing my words, Jack immediately shouted, "What? You can't inherit the property. I don't need you anymore. Let's get divorced right now." I felt the same way and retorted, "Let's do that. You married me for Dad's inheritance anyway. I'll gladly divorce you." Shouting this, I thrust the prepared divorce papers at my husband. As if expecting this to happen, Jack was a little flustered when I served him with the divorce papers, but he signed them as they were. As he left the house, he threw a parting shot, "I'm divorcing you, who's inheriting nothing, and marrying your sister Aurora to get the $10 million. I immediately went to the city hall and filed for divorce, relieved to be rid of such a despicable husband. The very next day, Jack submitted a marriage registration with Aurora. A few days later, he called me, still believing the story about the inheritance. "When are you going to start the inheritance process? Hurry up and give Aurora the $10 million, he shouted. I had been waiting for this call. I don't wanting to contact him after he left. I answer my ex-husband in a clerical tone. "Let's meet at our house this Sunday to discuss. I'll be ready with the paperwork." Thinking he was about to receive a fortune, Jack hung up delightedly, but little did he know what was coming. On the weekend, Jack and Aurora were surprised to see a lawyer at the house, but Jack seemed to convince himself, saying, "I guess we do need a lawyer for inheriting such a big amount." The lawyer then turned to Jack with a curious look and began, "Before we discuss the inheritance, there's a matter of the alimony claim from your ex-wife, Victoria, against you, Jack." The lawyer showed Jack several pictures. "It shows my ex-husband with my sister coming out of her house, and it is well dated." The lawyer began to speak to Jack. The photos are evidence of your affair before the divorce was finalized, so you'll need to pay alimony. I had immediately asked the lawyer to investigate Jack's infidelity after hearing him talk about the inheritance over the phone with Aurora. With me busy at Dad's funeral, Jack and Aurora must have let their guard down, meeting at her place often, which led to plenty of evidence. The topic swiftly changed from inheritance to alimony, leaving Jack and Aurora dumbfounded. Alimony is nothing compared to the $10 million inheritance. I'll pay it off right away. He arrogantly signed the alimony documents the lawyer handed him. I confirmed this and then said to my ex-husband, "Be happy with Aurora, who got zero inheritance, and since you signed the papers, make sure you pay the alimony." The moment Aurora heard about her zero inheritance, she screamed, "What? Why is my inheritance nothing? I'm supposed to get $10 million. Jack's face turned red with anger. "There's no way the inheritance is zero. I won't allow you to keep it all to yourself." The lawyer calmly explained to them, "Aurora, you are not legally related to your late father since he never legally adopted you. He was your stepfather, so you are not entitled to any inheritance." I had to explain this to Aurora, who seemed utterly confused. "You might not remember since you were about 1 year old when our parents remarried, but I remember clearly. I remember when our parents remarried, I was 6 years old and excited to suddenly have a younger sister. Never in my wildest dreams did I think my husband would be taken away by my sister. Both father and mother were in trouble with little children, and they thought it best to have someone to mediate between the parents and for the two of them to remarry. Mom treated me like her own daughter, and Dad cherished Aurora. Maybe Dad spoiled her more because she wasn't his biological daughter. Mom, suspected by relatives of marrying Dad for his wealth, refused to let Dad legally adopt Aurora. That's why the relatives always encouraged me to marry, knowing I was the sole inheritor of Dad's estate. Luckily, our parents didn't have any children together, which might have complicated the inheritance even further. Perhaps they chose not to have children to avoid future inheritance disputes. It now made sense why Dad continued to financially support Aurora even after she became an adult. Legally, I wasn't Mom's child either since we never did a legal adoption, but it never mattered in our daily life. Our parents never told Aurora about their respective past marriages, and today was the first time she learned the truth. Realizing the situation, Jack's face turned from red to pale. He had signed the alimony papers, missing out on the expected inheritance, and now owing alimony instead. My ex-husband looked at me with a pale face and asked, "Did you lie when you said, Aurora has a $10 million, and I have zero?" I struggled to hold back laughter as I replied, "Of course it was a lie. It was my revenge for your infidelity. And there's no way Dad's estate was worth $10 million. Even my father, who was indeed wealthy, did not have an estate worth $10 million. Aurora, who had been silent until then, suddenly burst out, "I relied on Dad's inheritance and spent a lot on shopping. And now that Dad's gone, who's going to give me the money he used to? Are you going to support me, big sis?" With a frightened look, she pleaded for an answer. "You're married, you have a husband you can depend on, you don't need me anymore, right? Let Jack feed you." Aurora turned to Jack, whose face was still ashen. He shook his head and said, "I can't afford it either, because I've shopped around so much in anticipation of an inheritance. Besides, I have to pay alimony too, so I'm full of myself." Then, suddenly, Jack kneeled down and began to apologize. "Victoria, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please, can we get back together?" The lawyer, preparing to leave, laughed at the sight. Jack's previously arrogant demeanor had completely vanished, replaced by this pitiful spectacle. After the discussion, Jack and Aurora left dejectedly, and it seems they divorced soon after. Jack, having married Aurora for the inheritance, lost interest in her once he realized there was no fortune. As he told himself, he cannot take care of Aurora because he has to pay alimony to me. Since Jack had no property, I decided to have him pay the alimony in installments from his monthly salary. The lawyer advised that this way, there would be no risk of missing out on payments. Aurora, now without our father's financial support, reluctantly started working daily part-time jobs. However, she couldn't manage her debts and eventually filed for bankruptcy. She left her apartment, and her whereabouts are now unknown. My father was thinking of my sister and helped her with money, but because he spoiled her like that, she is no longer able to work diligently. Now living alone in our family home, I've decided to decline any further marriage introductions from relatives. After my experience with Jack, I prefer to find a partner on my own terms, someone who genuinely cares for me and not my inheritance.